Hmm?
Excellent. Right. um, Hello to everyone watching on Facebook and YouTube. There will be an opportunity for questions later, and also welcome to all the RNCM students who are watching on Zoom. I'm extremely excited to welcome esteemed composer Max Richter to this Q&A session. Max is an award-winning Emmy and Grammy-nominated composer whose work transcends boundaries and often incorporates the style of early minimalists with an eclectic musical sensibility. His use of electronics and samples, spoken word and field recordings in combination with traditional acoustic instrumentation draws on many influences as diverse as psychedelia, electronica, punk music, as well as composers such as Yannis Xenakis, Luciano Berio, and many early American minimalists such as Steve Reich and Philip Glass. In 1989, he co-founded the chamber music group Piano Circus and has worked with Future Sounds of London, the BBC Philharmonic, and more recently, he has composed music for high-budget films, including Ad Astra, as well as Netflix's Black Mirror. His work continually challenges and comments on the use of technology in our modern daily lives, as well as commenting on many of the socio-political issues we currently face. Hi, Max.
Hello.
How are you getting on? What sort of projects, art, literature, music has been motivating you recently?
What have I been doing? Well, I'm fine, you know. It's a weird time, isn't it? Crazy times. I guess it's sort of been about trying to kind of reinvent what it means to sort of do what I'm doing under these strange circumstances, like we all have, and trying to find ways to, you know, kind of keep the music playing. I mean, this year we released a project, Voices, and that's a piece which has been cooking for quite a long time. It's based around the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it kind of comes out of that kind of post-truth politics, I guess, that we've all been sort of putting up with increasingly over the last kind of 10 years or so. So that was the kind of big thing. And yeah, meanwhile, I've got some scoring projects going on sort of in the background. Mm-hmm. And
so, So you feel these scoring projects are beginning to pick up again, because this has been a year where you have focused on this Voices project and really sort of gone into your own world, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to sort of bounce between solo things and collaborative things. I like to do both. The records and the solo things are sort of, you know, that's where it all started for me, and that's where I just get to do what I want to do, basically, which is a great privilege and a wonderful thing. Scoring projects are, you know, they're by nature collaborative, and they're team efforts, and so it's quite a different kind of a process, quite a different kind of dynamic, also enjoyable, but quite different. And basically all of film production and TV production kind of stopped last year, and over the last few months everybody's suddenly woken up all at once. So suddenly there's this kind of tsunami of things that we kind of all got pushed, and now they all want to restart, you know, so there's a bit of a situation around that.
Yeah, I suppose you've been sort of overloaded with stuff. So my first question is, what do you feel motivates your compositional aesthetic on a given project? Obviously, TV and film stuff is sort of different in the way that the filmmaker may have a preconceived notion of what they want from a project. But do you generally try and bring in as much of your own musical exposure to a project, or do you just try and find an appropriate style that acutely represents a particular idea within a project?
Well, I think the solo projects and the scoring projects are different in that regard. In the solo projects, there really isn't, well, I mean, there are sort of, in a way, no limits, and it's about trying to discover the material which conveys the subject matter. I mean, that may be that the idea of subject matter is maybe a bit controversial to begin with, but, you know, for me, the thing that lights the fuse of a project is having something I want to talk about. I personally feel that music is a medium which is a way of talking. It can be a forum, it can be a catalyst, it can be a provocation, or a space to think. And for me, it's about finding a kind of a language which most directly and clearly and also simply provides that. And then trying to find some kind of, I mean, music is a technology in a sense, some sort of what you might describe it as a kind of a cognitive technology which kind of frames the subject. So that's the solo projects. I guess one other thing about them is I feel like when I'm starting something, having committed to trying to write the piece is constantly then asking you a question. It's kind of saying to you, what now and why? And answering those questions that's the process of composition. Even provisionally, I mean, there are no answers, but provisional answers, that's what composing is, trying to kind of fill in those empty spaces that are asking you a question, or to relate to them in a meaningful way. So that's kind of the way that I view the solo projects. The scoring projects are different. They are fundamentally collaborative. I mean, my starting point with a scoring project is trying to understand or discover what is the sort of innate, inevitable sound of that world in musical terms. What is the kind of what is it that feels like part of the furniture of that world we're inhabiting? And then in more detail, you have obviously all of the kind of utility aspects of music within a scoring context, which is like, the way time passes or point of view or, all these kinds of things. So, and that's something you figure out collaboratively with the director and with the editors and, whatever.
Do you find it difficult when a director has a very clear vision of what they want and you might not necessarily agree with them? Maybe they have some temp music that they're very keen on. Do you?
I mean, it's a funny one, that. I mean, you want people to have, strong ideas, because then you can have, you have the basis for a conversation. But I mean, the temp, and in fact, the temp is, very useful, because obviously directors are mostly not musicians, and so they find it hard to even articulate what it is they really want quite often in ways which are actually meaningful. Because you need a musical training to really begin to talk about music properly. So the temp is actually a very useful thing. It also has to be there for the editors. I mean, they just cannot, almost nobody can cut without music. It's weird. I mean, they just need it. So if there is going to be music, then there should be music when they're cutting, even just to supply some sort of a time base or a sense of how quickly the time passes or whatever. So it's useful to have something to talk about. It's useful to have strong points of view. But at the same time, ideally, you want a relationship with the other creative parties in the film process, who are, you want people who are prepared to go on a journey, because actually, it's actually a process of discovery as well. There is a kind of, yes, I'm going to write this kind of music and I'll write that, and that will, there's a sort of planning thing and a sort of a sort of conceptual aspect to it. So yes, I'll write it like this. But then you do have to sort of forget about all of that and just explore that world from a musical standpoint. And then you probably have to throw away half of your ideas. Or your plans or your preconceptions, because at a certain point you want the material just to kind of come alive and start to do its own thing. I mean, that's really what we're hoping for.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of, in a similar vein, recontextualization is a theme which runs Sorry. So the internet just dropped. Recontextualization is a theme that seems to run through quite a lot of your work.
Yeah.
And I was wondering whether this was perhaps influenced by Luciano Berio, your time with him in Italy at all.
Well, it's funny, you know. I mean, I don't know if I'm stupid or something, but I obviously it is, but I didn't really sort of catch on to this. I mean, you know, Berio is all about, you know, kind of intertextuality, a kind of relating to historical subjects, and also, you know, horizontally, you know, the Beatles, and, you know, he sort of took things from everywhere and worked in a sculptural way with these pre-existing materials and made new relationships and sort of generated this incredibly rich work out of that process. And yeah, of course I knew about this, but, you know, I made Recomposed, and I sort of didn't make the connection. It was utterly stupid, really. And somebody said to me in an interview, well, obviously, you know, as a student of Berry, and I was like, oh yeah. so it was kind of hiding in plain sight, this thing. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think all composers, well, I mean, I'm speaking for everyone, but I mean, you know, music is also about music. Music doesn't come from nothing. You know, if you're writing a progression or a bit of harmony or a melodic line, it has a relationship to, you know, every experience you've had of that bit of harmony or similar melodic shapes that you've ever heard or that, you know. I mean, we're working in music because we love music, because we've heard other music, and everything affects everything. So I think this principle of intertextuality is very, very fertile, actually. And, you know, you can, for example, say a piece like Infra. Now, Infra is, in a way, Infra is sort of, how could you describe it? So Infra is about the 7/7 bombings in London. Infra meaning below, so underground. Mm. Infra is also traveling music, because these attacks were happening to commuters. So traveling music. So then I start thinking about Winterreise, because, like, that's the most amazing piece of traveling music ever written. Right. So then there are the whole of Infra gets populated by these kind of Schubert atoms, bits of Winterreise, bits of other Schubert, and I then start to make all these associations into that other work. That's not to say it's a kind of Schubert covers album, but it's something which is in dialogue, in a kind of meaningful dialogue, at least to me, with a pre-existing work. And to me, that's, you know, in the way that, you know, every guitar band is either, you know, the Beatles, the Kinks, the Stones, you know, and it's these sort of lineages and everything being about something which went before is, to me, that's quite natural. I mean, there are exceptions. You know, there are people who invent music as though music didn't exist. Someone like Cage or Xenakis, you know, who really are making these sort of sound objects almost as though there really were no sound objects before them. But that's very rare, I think. And yeah.
Do you think that's rare because it's harder for a wider audience to connect or sort of relate to these sort of new sound worlds? Or do you think...
No, it's not that, but I think I just think it takes a very particular mind to be able to start as though there were nothing else. You know, right. I mean, I think Cage he's really, really interesting because he had just such a radical relationship and understanding of what, you know, sound objects, sound events meant, and how they could be interacted with and handled. And Xenakis came from pure mathematics and statistics and probability theory. So they really started from somewhere else. And that's why their work has this kind of otherness. It has this very peculiar, it's otherness. sort of almost alienated from what came before, in a way that Berrioz's music doesn't. Berrioz's music has, you just can feel the roots all the way back in what he's doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I've heard you mention as a child, or as a teenager, you built your own synthesizer.
I did.
And I'm just wondering, like, your thoughts on the continued development of this technology and how it's really affected your compositional output throughout your life.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the electronic music started when I heard Kraftwerk as a kid, and then, tried to figure out how were those sounds being made and how could I get my hands on them, because they were just utterly fresh, and I was just sort of intoxicated by the kind of just the complete newness of that sound. I thought, Stravinsky was like new music to me at that time. Right. So it was just like a completely different thing. So yeah, I became obsessed with this, and then eventually ended up buying. You could get kits of basically bags of components and just solder them together, and then you can come up with a synthesizer in the end of it. I mean, for me, those instruments are they're very exciting, especially analog instruments like this thing behind me, because they have a sort of unpredictable and organic, and I guess, they feel almost like they're alive. Every time you switch that on, even without changing the patch, it will be different. And that's just because of all the sort of inaccuracy and all of that in there. So I really like those instruments for additional colors in a way. I see that as in a way quite natural extension of the process you get in the 19th century. And the orchestra just gets bigger all the time, and you get more and different winds and more evolved brass, and that's driven by what composers wanted to do. So for me, it's adding electronics to that palette is just a continuation of what Beethoven was after, what Wagner was after, just more and different colors, and the electronics give us extraordinary resources.
Because these in your music, these extra colors still sit within your melody and harmony, like more traditional melody and harmony, perhaps.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating to see those new colors being used in that way.
Yeah, I mean,
rather than just simply colors for color's sake.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
If you know what I mean.
No, I totally understand that. Absolutely. And that's in a way that's quite, I guess that sort of connects into my general sort of obsessions with obsession. I don't know if that's too strong a word, but I have a real fondness for the way notes move one against another, and why the next note should be where it is. I'm looking for a kind of economy and a sort of ecology of notes. I mean, my background is in very straightforward, harmony and counterpoint. Had to do Palestrina and all of this, every week, and so I'm very much about the sort of the way lines move, and that for me is just a very basic and instinctive way to think about musical material. So when I'm bringing new colors in, I guess I sort of frame them from that perspective, and I'm always a bit doubtful about purely, I mean, this is maybe a bit of a bold statement, but sort of purely coloristic material. I mean, it's just not for me. It just, I guess it's to do with they're wanting to be some kind of a reason for the sound. And if you've got a harmonic situation or some bit of counterpoint, then you have reasons for the notes to be there, because there's a kind of a, that note has to go there because of what happened before. So so I have a kind of a faith in that principle. I think it's something to do with, you know, there's a world of counterpoint where things kind of make sense, and there's something rather, in a way, comforting about that.
And presumably, a lot of this stuff starts on pencil and paper or at the keyboard.
Yeah. I mean, I
tend to feel these progressions like as you're sort of writing.
Well, I mean, I do. I most do. I mean, it varies really. I mean, if I'm working on instrumental music, then I'll mostly be working on a piece of paper, and then it sort of migrates to the computer for scoring and that kind of So it goes kind of piece of paper, maybe some Logic mock-ups or something, and then Sibelius, and then gets recorded from there. For scoring projects, excuse me. For scoring projects, you basically have to be in the machine all the time, because directors want to hear stuff, and there's just no point presenting a sheet of manuscript paper. That would be funny. It would be quite funny, actually.
It would be quite funny. Well, I mean, for these scoring projects, do you generally sort of create your own sample libraries or sound world, as it were, or synth patches, which are sort of unique to a project before?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that can be sort of part of the composition. I think, composing what it is you're even going to be using. Although, I mean, for me, the orchestra is really a big part of what I do. So, there will more than likely be some, if you like, traditional orchestral elements, and those will be recorded, with real players. But yeah, I mean, for example, with Ad Astra, we, and this is the kind of thing you can do in movies, which is super fun, and you just sort of don't get to do these kinds of things other times. So Ad Astra is the story of this guy who leaves Earth and he goes to Neptune, I think. So he goes basically out of the solar system. He makes this journey. So when I was thinking about this project, I thought about that journey, and it occurred to me that the Voyager probes had made that journey. They just left the solar system quite recently. So I got in touch, I tracked down the people who were sort of driving them, which is, or rather at least curating all the data they sent back, which is the University of Iowa Plasma Physics Lab. So they have data which the Voyager sent back every 9 seconds, I think it is. These little snapshots of the electromagnetic spectrum. So we got all this data and used it to make computer modeled instruments, so that I could basically do it's almost like a field recording thing. So when Brad is flying past sort of Saturn or something, the music you're hearing is actually made from the site, data gathered at the site.
Right. Yeah.
Which is just things like that are such fun. I mean, that's just.
Yeah, I mean that's
great.
That's so fun. I mean, it's like the Black Mirror nosedive episode. You use the literal sound of the sound voting as part of the score itself.
Yeah, well, that was fun as well. Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, I think if there's any more time, I'll just say to everyone in the who's on the call that to get your questions prepared, and I'm going to ask my last question to you, Max. I'm just wondering, in general, how do you feel your personal artistic, like these solo projects, live alongside your film and commercial work? Because there are occasions when bits of your personal output become part of another film. I'm thinking about Arrival with Nature of Daylight, etc.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering how you feel about this. Do you treat them as a single entity, or is it sort of, do you very much think of your output as something very different?
Well, I think it's context, really. I mean, in the case of Arrival, that was, I mean, that's in a way quite a good example. I mean, the film projects I do are mostly, I mostly do them because the material is appears to me to be important. Important as in has something to say about the world we live in, which I think needs saying. So, you know, Arrival is, in a way, it's a film, well, it's language over bombs is the kind of short version of what Arrival is, right? So, you know, when Denis called me up about it, that was very much our conversation. And, you know, On the Nature of Daylight comes from the Blue Notebooks, which was a kind of protest record, kind of anti-Iraq war record. And so I felt like it was really appropriate to be used in the film. And there's another sort of nice thing, another kind of nice connection into Arrival, which is the way the time structure of Arrival works, which has got this sort of almost mirror kind of a structure. And On the Nature of Daylight has a sort of palindromic structure. So I kind of thought, well, yeah, this is, you know, it's kind of perfect.
Excellent. So the first question we're going to be hearing from is from T.W. Roberts. So,
thanks, Chris.
Hey.
And hi, thanks, Max, as well. It's a pleasure to be able to be part of this discussion. I hope this isn't too direct. If this is a question that's making something explicit that should remain implicit, feel free to bat it away. But I know you're familiar. I know from what I know of your work, you've been involved with arranging the work of, say, Arvo Pärt and Reich, and among others. And from what the more I learn about them, especially Pärt, the more I realize that his work is heavily tied to his faith and very dependent on it. And even to a greater extent, I find that Reich, that's the case for Reich as well, in works like Tehillim, where his Judaic faith is informing his writing to an enormous degree. And that's something that I feel, maybe I'm putting something there that isn't there, but that's something I feel like I experience in your work, or at least feel might be under the surface. And you used the word faith earlier in a different context, albeit. So I'm just wondering if that's something you would reject, or is there a kind of spiritual or underlying deeper aspect that informs your work?
Well, I think I mean, I don't have a kind of a straightforward kind of orthodox religious orientation in the way that Arvo Pärt has, or Steve Reich. I mean, they're both really interesting examples, I think, of somebody whose work really, it kind of flows out of that aspect of their lives. But I do think creativity is a kind of, is an attempt to sort of understand the world. I mean, you know, writing a piece of music is at the same time a kind of research project into the world. It's a way to sort of investigate it. And it's at the same time a kind of a wish fulfillment in a way. It's, you know, if only the world was sort of as ordered as, you know, this thing I've just made. So there is I think there are some aspects of creative practice which overlap with those traditions. And I mean, beyond that, I'm interested in the questions, you know, that's kind of what drives me.
Thank you. Yeah, I should say as well, my brother asked me to tell you that he says you rule. So, I'll honor that for him as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tiwi. Now we're going to be hearing from Adam Webster.
Hi, Max. Thank you so much for your time today.
Sure,
for your wonderful
pleasure.
music.
Oh, thank you.
Your piece from last year, your Opus 2020, which you wrote for the Beethoven anniversary, as a quotation at the end from the Opus 109 Sonata. What was it about that particular piece of all the Beethoven that spoke to you? And was there any Beethoven that you considered that didn't work for some reason with that piece?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I love 109. I used to play it a lot when I was a kid, and I just love it. I love it. And it's as simple as that, honestly. And I wanted to, because Opus 2020, basically it's like a mobile of these overlapping time structures made of sort of Beethoven atoms. And I felt like, the piece was a celebration for the anniversary. And I just felt like Beethoven should have the last word. Enough of me already, and let's just hear, let's hear the man. So 109 is, it's just such a phenomenal piece. And I used to love playing it when I was a kid. So I just thought, yeah, let's put that there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it really works well, what you've done with it. It's fantastic.
Cool.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam. Now we're going to be hearing from Emilio.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks, Max, for being here.
Sure.
So I wanted to ask you, I feel in your music that you really take the audience like into a certain mindset or a mood when listening to your music, whether it be like a tragic sense or a reflexive state. I wanted to know, like, what elements in the composition do you think that bring the audience to this particular mindset? Like, could it be perhaps the rhythm, the progression, the timbre of the instruments? What brings people to really engage with the music?
Well, that's quite a hard question, because I mean, ultimately, like all of us, I'm just writing the music that I would love to hear, but no one's written it yet. So I have to write it. I mean, the sort of first audience is yourself, and you're writing music which, satisfies something in you or pleases you in some way, or, you just wish it was out there, but it isn't. So you write it in that way, I think. I think beyond that, like I was saying before, I'm interested in the sort of maximum from the minimum. So I'm trying to have a kind of principle of real economy, nothing extraneous, and a kind of aesthetic of a kind of a plain spoken aesthetic, so that the material, the experience of the material is kind of direct and simple. So I'm constantly sort of working on that aspect of the work. So that, I don't know if that really answers the question, but I think maybe that gives you a sense of what I'm trying to do anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks, Emilio. Now we're going to be hearing from Emily Pedersen.
Thanks, Max.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here. It's been really inspiring.
Sure, it's a pleasure.
I wanted to ask a question. Oh, thank you. I wanted to ask a question on your approach to some of your socio-political work. I know you've written on quite a lot of topics, from the 7/7 bombings to the aftermath of the Sarajevo conflict, and I wondered what your approach was, because obviously these topics come with quite a lot of emotions, which can almost be a burden. And I wonder if you do you see yourself as in those and feeling all those emotions? And if you do, how do they not overwhelm you? And or do you view yourself almost as an outsider looking into that?
Yeah, that's a hard question as well. I think I think for me, it's really all about the stories. You know, I'm very, you know, I love stories. I'm passionate about literature, and I think music is potentially a storytelling a medium, you know, a medium which can provide a kind of illumination on a topic, or a space to think about a topic, and that's really what I'm trying to get to with those works. So, you know, a piece like Memory House or Voices, or lots of them really. You know, I'm trying to, first of all, kind of understand some of the questions myself by writing the piece, and to get to a kind of a closer relationship, a closer understanding of the subjects. But also, you know, I am trying to make a kind of a collective space, a shared space, to a kind of a forum, really. It's like a musical forum to figure this stuff out, you know? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Now we have a question from Ava Podgorski, asking a question from slightly outside the realm of composition. When working on collaborative projects with non-musicians, for example, your score for Wolfworks with McGregor and the RH, what would you say is the biggest challenge in these collaborations, and what advice would you offer to students working on projects like this?
Well, I think, I mean, the big thing is to try and understand, you know, what the language we're using even means. You know, trying to talk about music is very hard, especially with, you know, non-musicians. Just to understand that you're actually sort of not like this, you actually are talking about the same things. And then to just immerse yourself in the material. You know, for me working, I mean, Wayne is an exception, because he is, you know, he's just a phenomenal mind, and so full of ideas, and so kind of sparky, and we just bat material back and forth all the time in a very kind of conversational way, and it's just super fun. But more generally, I think it's just, yeah, really getting close to the material, and trying to discover what it is in your voice, in your biography, in your way of being a composer, being a musician, that can kind of illuminate it. I think dance is really fascinating, because it's a language I don't speak. You know, my world is full of texts and symbols and scribbles, and, you know, either scores or words, or, you know, it's very sort of texty. And dance is not, at least to me. I mean, obviously there is a text in dance, but only a dancer can read it, and that's not me. So I feel like I'm in this kind of weird other world where I can see that there is something going on, but all I'm getting from it is a kind of emotional journey. And I love that about it. You know, I love that. It's incredibly satisfying, and I sort of understand it as a kind of, I don't know what really. It's like being an alien, you know, in this other world of dancers, which I just love it.
Thanks, Max. And now Joel Kapianen will have a question for you.
Hi, it's Kupiainen.
Hi, Joel.
Hi, Max. Thanks for coming. I have a question about AI. I'm interested. What do you think of use of AI with music, and would you use it? And what is then the role of human composer when AI can do some of what humans used to?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and I think it's going to be a major challenge in the future. For me personally, music is a way for, you know, one person and another person to talk to one another. It's a way to communicate in a fundamentally human way. So that's I mean, whether that's electronic music or instrumental music or whatever it is, I'm interested in, you know, what human beings have to say to one another. That for me is super important. I can see that it's inevitable that we're going to be getting AI, you know, bot composers, and I mean there already are some, you know, loads of them, and sort of auto-generated music. There'll be a tsunami of it, and there kind of already is. It's inevitable. The economics are, you know, from a certain rather unfortunate perspective, the economics of it are unarguable. You know, there's no pesky royalty stream to pay your AI composer, and I'm sure it's going to happen. So I think, yeah, I mean, it is what it is, and I think we're going to really, you know, that's going to be a big challenge, I think. But yeah, we'll see.
Oh, it seems like we have one more question from Tiwi Roberts. Do you encounter a tension between the role of performance versus the role of creating a piece entirely in the studio? Does this become a factor for you when deciding how much free rein to give yourself in working with technology?
Yes, in a way. I mean, you know, for example, a piece like Wolfworks, Three Worlds. I mean, that's it's a big orchestral score. It's very complicated because it interlocks with a lot of electronic material, both kind of pre-recorded and live. And when we play the ballet, it is a certain way, and that a lot of the electronics are still live, but everything is locked to a time base because of the dancers. It has to be that way, the dancers and the lighting and everything. So then it's all locked. When we play the concert version of that music, where I'm doing all the electronics in real time, there's a bit more ebb and flow. So there are bits of it which are sort of locked onto a click, and other bits of it where we'll play until X and then the next thing happens, you know. So I think you do have to kind of reinvent, or at least at this point, you have to reinvent a little bit in order to transfer things from kind of one space to another.
Thanks, Max.
Sure.
I just have one more question to you. I'm just wondering about how your approach differs between indie films and big budget films, because you've got fantastic insight into this.
Well, I mean, they're very different, aren't they? They're different creatures. I mean, I think it's quite difficult to generalize because it's really about the people. I mean, obviously, there's a budget thing, you know, and on a small indie project, you're just not going to have the resources to do sort of big orchestral stuff, and that's, you know, likely is not going to feel appropriate anyway. You know, it's a different kind of a palette and different kind of register. But on smaller projects, you have very close personal artistic relationships, which, you know, is really valuable and a wonderful experience. You know, you're going on a creative journey with one or two other people, which is fantastic. When you're on a bigger budget project, there are just more people, you know, and there are these endless producers, you know. You know, you've got the director, and there you are trying to sort of do art, and then there's like 20 people in an office building somewhere, you know, just kind of preventing you doing it. So it can be very frustrating.
Which do you prefer?
Well, I mean, I think, again, it's really hard to generalize. I mean, you know, I basically, you know, I do things not really because of the scale of them, because I've turned down some, you know, enormous things. But I do them because I fall in love with the material in some way, you know, and I think it's important material that, you know, wants to be told. So yeah.
So the material is the most important thing.
Absolutely, it's 100% of it.
Max, so much. Thank you so much for today. We're all extremely grateful for your time answering our questions.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for everyone who's contributed to this. Yeah.
All right, guys. Good luck.